Hosting provided by Host Tornado. They offer website hosting packages, dedicated servers, and VPS solutions. Host.t.net.
Programming Throwdown, episode 45, Inside Video Game Programming. Take it away, Jason.
Hey everyone, I upgraded to Windows 10 on my Windows machine. It's pretty cool. It's a big upgrade. I skipped. I had 7, but I skipped. I guess it's 8.
Yep, and everyone skipped 9.
Everyone skipped 9 because no
Counting.
No major company wrote code that could handle Windows 9 without accidentally calling it Windows 98. So they skipped that one, which was smart, and went straight to Windows 10, and I got it. It's pretty cool.
But it's not a beta anymore, right? It's actually like out.
Yeah, it's totally out. The only thing that was what was hard was my Sound Blaster card. Sound Blaster said they weren't going to create drivers for Windows 10 until October, and so but then it turns out somebody created some third-party driver, which is probably like leeching my credit card and other valuable information.
I was gonna say it's probably better, but it's probably mining bitcoins.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. It's actually, when I ran the setup, it is the same. I think he just somehow monkey patched the existing driver to fit Windows 10 because the install shield was exactly the same and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's something about my social and credit card or something, but other than that, it worked fine.
I attempted to do it, and I got this error. It said something happened, and then the subtext, something happened. And then
that's it.
Yep, and you could close.
So were you in like a limbo state now, like where your machine just closed?
No, it was like, you're supposed to. I was supposed to create media for it or whatever, and so like I have a feeling that you're supposed to wait for your turn, and it's not been my turn yet, and so but there was like people said like, oh, you can just go to the download tool, and so I just downloaded the download tool, and I think maybe it knows it's not my turn. I'm not sure. I didn't look into it. I was just going to try it and see if it worked, and it didn't. And so then I gave up and figured I'd try it later.
I gotcha. One thing that helped is I got the... I had the developer preview, and I was running it in a virtual box, and I was like kind of seeing what it was like. And anyone who had the developer preview had like a priority queue. So on the very first day, I was able to get in. I didn't plan on that. It's just kind of luck.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool.
So did you install from scratch, or did you just upgrade?
I installed from scratch because part of it was I'd upgraded from like 2000 to XP to 7 on the same hard drive.
Whoa!
I know, it's this ancient 5400 RPM, magnetic hard drive. And
wait, so it's like 100 gigabytes or something?
Something like that, 100 or 200. It's uber slow.
Oh.
And I know you can migrate to SSD, like migrate your Windows, but I thought, it's been so long and so patched together that I just wiped it and started over.
Wow.
Yeah, it was not bad. It's quite like liberating to not have just an incredibly cluttered, programs menu and all of that.
Yeah, every time I have to clean install, there's always something missing that takes me forever to remember how I got it installed last time. Like the non-obvious stuff, right? Like, oh, here's this program, but how did I do that? Oh, there's this plugin. Where's that plugin? And it just turns into a mess, right? It's right because your system's just not set up the way it used to be set up anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten a lot easier now because I do so much in the browser, and you have like whether you're using Chrome or Firefox, it syncs, and so all of my Chrome extensions just kind of magically showed up and everything.
Yeah. I guess my problem is I use my desktop for exclusively things I can't do in the browser typically. Because if I can do it in the browser, I just do it from my iPad or my phone.
That's true. That's a good point. For me, it's basically just Steam. And one thing about this that was kind of cool. I pointed Steam to where Steam was installed when I was on Windows 7, and I just told Steam to install there, and it detected that. And it said, hey, I see you're installing on top of Steam, so I'm going to figure out what games you've installed and like get your OS sort of up to speed with your file system, and it kind of reconciled all of that. It was really cool.
And saved them a bunch of bandwidth.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they had a huge incentive to do that. So that's Windows 10. Apparently there's bugs. There's this Ars Technica article talking about some bugs. I haven't hit any of them, but I've literally just used Steam. Oh, and Audacity to record the show.
Are we recording on Windows 10 right now?
Not now, but I was recording on Windows 10 a little earlier, so
okay.
Yeah, it worked.
Very good.
Yeah, so that's Windows 10. Another piece of news that's kind of interesting is there's a lot of this where sort of you might work at a place and there's as we're going to talk to some video game professionals later, there's I'm sure they have a graphics team and a graphics engine team, artist team. Maybe they have like a analytics team that's looking at how many people are using.
We'll have to ask them. We haven't said that yet. Oh, stay tuned. We have an awesome interview that we're going to do here in a few minutes.
That's right.
Well, I hope it'll be awesome.
Yeah. And so maybe they have like a analytics team that's looking at how many people are hitting their website, things like that. Where I work, there's the same thing. There's a bunch of different teams, and they all sort of have their own hardware, like their own resources, their own cluster of machines that they use to go off and do work. And it's not very efficient. I mean, if one team isn't using their cluster, and the other team needs to do something really important, they should be able to use that other team's cluster without like having to ask for permission and things like that. That's kind of takes forever, right? So Google's had this thing for a while called Borg, named after the Star Trek thing, but they recently open sourced. I don't think they open sourced the Borg itself, like what they have, but they made a similar version that like leveraged a lot of that. Maybe it's like Borg version 2 or something, and they open source that, and it's called Kubernetes. We'll give you a link to it in the show notes, but it's pretty cool. You can set this up on all of your machines company wide, and you can set up quotas and things like that, and say, okay, this team is guaranteed to have 50 machines, and this other team is guaranteed to have 50 machines. And so if you have a job that can take anywhere from 50 to 100 machines, it'll use all 100 as long as the other team isn't using it. And if the other team comes on, it'll start kicking your guys out and replacing it with that other team's, because they have a quota, right? So it does all of that. It's pretty cool, and I'm pretty excited to try it out.
Yeah, this sounds like something I need for my home. I run about 40 different computers in my basement, and
right.
No, that's a lot.
The one that powers the nuclear submarine that searches for dinosaurs, has that one finished yet?
That sounds awesome. Is that a book?
I just made that up. Oh, man.
Speaking of books, it's time for Book of the Show.
Book of the Show. My book of the show is it's a relic, but it's quite entertaining. It's the Mythical Man Month. And it's an old book. It's like, 1998, I think? 1995. And it's all about sort of project management, software engineering, and sort of how... I mean, he talks about a bunch of different things. I'll just say one thing. One piece of it is they talk about how one person can do a lot because that person can keep a lot in his mind and doesn't really have to document or collaborate. And so they could just hold the state in their mind, especially when they're doing like a prototype. And as soon as you add, a second or a third person, it increases the overhead and causes the productivity to go down. And then you eventually you make it up with, economies of scale, right? And then I guess at some point, if you keep going, then it breaks down again. And this thing kind of talks about just project management, how hard it is to estimate schedules and things like that. And it's really quite interesting. I won't do it justice by trying to explain it myself, but if you're interested in how software companies get things done, if you're the type of person that's done a lot of side projects and they either kind of don't go anywhere or they tend to linger, and you kind of think to yourself, man, like how like if you have to, how can you tell someone a year from now there's going to be product X? Like how is that possible? And this sort of kind of breaks that down, explains how to do that. Have you read this?
No, I have
Mythical
not.
Man Month?
The first few times I saw this reference, I always thought it said the mythical man moth, and then I thought it was like a I don't know, like a fiction book or whatever.
Nice.
Or like, you know, Loch Ness monster, the mythical man moth. I don't know why, but for like several years when I kept seeing it mentioned, I always thought that's what it said.
Awesome. Mythical Man Moth.
Yeah, month. Yeah. Anyways, I have not read it. I hear
for people who
that I
don't
should
know,
read it, I guess, but
yeah, for people who don't know, the man month is basically a month's worth of one person's work. So in other words, you might have 8 man months worth of work, but if you have 8 people, then it gets done in a month. So that's sort of where the man, in theory, yeah, it's where the
that's
where
it's
the
mythical.
man month comes from. Yeah,
right,
yeah.
because it says, oh, if you had 30 people working on it, well, I guess a man month isn't 30 days, but yeah, 30 people working on it, you could finish it in a day.
Yeah, like the calculus doesn't work that way in reality. Have you heard that saying, like, this baby's taking too long, put 9 women on it. Get it done, get it conceived, get it birthed in a month.
You can have 9 babies in 9 months with 9 people, but you can't make 1 baby in 1 month with 9 people.
That's right. And it's the same with software. Maybe not the same numbers, but...
Okay, my book is a fiction book, Armada, by Ernest Cline. You may remember him. He's been a previous Book of the Month author. He wrote Ready Player One, which, Jason, you read Ready Player One, yes?
I thought it was amazing.
Yep.
Yeah, I was
so we
super
both
big
read
fan.
it. And I also really liked Ready Player One. Armada is also very good. I didn't like it as much as Ready Player One. To be fair, it's not a sequel. It's a completely just another book.
I'm actually glad it wasn't a sequel because I felt like Ready Player One was pretty conclusive. I wasn't really ready to sort of see that storyline continue.
Nope. It's just another story. Has nothing really to do. I mean, it's a similar style, obviously, same author, but completely different world. And I find it, instead of being themed of like 80s, stuff, it's more like science fiction and like video games, like science fiction video games, instead of like 80s video games.
Okay.
So that's just more my cup of tea. And so in some ways that made it like a more fun read for me, but in some ways I think it hurt it a little because he has lots of references and he would explain them like, my buddy tells me, use the Force, Luke, quoting my favorite line from Star Wars. And it's like, yeah, we got it. We know.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
But when I read it for 80s references, I'm not as good. And so like I needed it and it was okay. But
yeah.
Now it's kind of like, no, I already know that. So I found that part a little bit grating. But
well, I know nothing about, well, not nothing, but I know by nerd standards, I know nothing about science fiction. So this will be good for me, I think.
Now, when I say science fiction, this isn't like hard science fiction. This is like Star Wars, Star Trek.
Even that, yeah. I mean, okay. I'm very weak. I know I don't know anything.
Okay. Anyways, but I definitely enjoyed it. It was a fun read, and towards the end, thankfully it seemed like I didn't notice him saying it as much, so it was easy. I didn't feel like I was getting bombarded, and I actually listened to this on Audible as I do lots of my reading because I call it reading, but it's listening because I'm stuck in my car for a long commute each day. And if you would like to get a book from Audible, they do help sponsor our podcast, and you can go to www.audibletrial.com/programming Throwdown, all one word, all lowercase, and you can get a free book for a month, and then you can cancel it and you can keep the book. And I have a subscription for Audible that I just pay for, and I really enjoy it. And I've canceled it in the past when I had too many books to read, and you get to keep all those books. And then when you pick it back up again, you can get more.
Awesome. Very cool.
So I like Audible, and if you have a commute, it definitely helps the commute be a little less tedious.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, listen to us first.
A little less.
Listen to us first, but then after you listen to us,
I thought they probably, when we publish this podcast, they sit at their computer and listen to it until it's done, and then they go to work.
Yeah, I mean, you can't record, like take notes on the book of the show if you're driving. That's true.
But to be fair, this will be posted on our website later.
Right. Exactly. Cool. Okay,
Time
so
for
it's
tool of the show.
tool of the show. So
that was almost
my
robot
tool of the
sounding.
show is I actually posted about this on actually I posted on my personal G Plus, but it's called Photopia, and it's a interactive fiction. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically
Choose your own adventure.
yeah, it's choose your own adventure, but instead of a multiple choice at every step, it's these 2-word imperative sentences. And the state machine is much, much larger. So, in other words, you could put things like go north, get torch, things like that, open
It's like
door.
Zork.
Exactly. Zork is an interactive fiction. And so I generally hate interactive fiction because the puzzles really frustrate me. And because it's so open-ended, like any verb you can think of may be what you need to do to that torch to get to the next room. So you're like kick torch, drop torch, and it's just, you end up like having to go and like read a tutorial or something like that.
That's called cheating.
Yeah, you end up having to cheat. But I love the idea of using the interactivity to delay the story and to sort of add a human element to the story. And I mean, that's basically what Final Fantasy does, right? I mean, Final Fantasy, in my opinion, is a movie that has sort of these game elements in between to kind of stitch everything together and like to kind of keep you excited, right?
But there are real choices too that do influence the story.
Yeah, that's true. It's an oversimplification. But so this interactive fiction Photopia, there is not that much puzzle solving, and there's also a help built in. You can just type help, or maybe it's hint, and you get a hint.
Can you just type give answer?
Well, if you type hint, you get a pretty good hint.
Okay, go end.
Go end. End game. The narrative is extremely compelling. Basically, it's temporally non-linear, and so you start off kind of in the middle, and it's called Photopia because there's these different colors representing the different actors in the scene, whose perspective you're in, and it's a little more complicated than that with the colors, but at any rate, and so you sort of like flow. You know that you're not flowing linearly through time because you're experiencing things just in very, like, you experience someone as a teenager and then you experience their birth, and it's just kind of like, but it all kind of stitches together. And for me, I kind of figured out all these disparate characters. I figured out sort of how it came together about 70% of the way through, and it was just kind of mind blowing. Like all of a sudden, it kind of hit me what was going on. So definitely check that out. You can get it on. There's a web version. There's iOS, Android. It's all free, which is pretty cool. So check that out. Also, Bence Magyar posted, and he had another interactive fiction called Choice of Robots. This one's literally a choose your own adventure, but some of the choices you make cause your stats to go up in different ways, and that kind of limits or expands, in other words, the choices you can make later on. So in other words, if you make a bunch of choices of type X, it'll be harder to choose choices of type Y, and so it kind of like guides your character in a sense. But these are kind of fun. They're usually pretty short and short and sweet. And Photopia is definitely a must. Photopia is like the Beatles of interactive fiction, like what the Beatles are to music. So I mean, everyone will love this. Will love Photopia. So
it's the Uber of interactive fiction.
That's right. They're the unicorn.
The Netflix. So. Yep. Okay.
Got it.
My tool is not a tool, but a game surprise, like almost every week, and that is Don't Starve on iOS.
Is this good? I've seen this on Steam for PC.
Yeah, so I guess it's been out for like computers, and I think there's even a version for the PSP, maybe PlayStation. I don't know if it's on the Xbox. But Don't Starve, it's kind of a roguelike, except that it's fully animated in a very specific style. I guess it might or might not be your style, but you run around kind of a procedurally generated world in 2D, and you collect stuff and you try to craft things and you try to survive, and like kind of everything goes against you. Your guy gets hungry and you need to make sure to provide him enough food. Not everything is nice to you in the world. And so I've been playing. I've really enjoyed it.
Cool.
I had stopped playing it for a little while because I kind of got like frustrated. Like I did something, I guess it was my fault, but then like, I ended up like dying at a part that I didn't think I should have died at, and then I got kind of mad, and so I've been playing it. But I will go back to it. The game was just doing its part and being harsh, which is a little bit of a harsh game.
Okay.
I think a lot of games baby us these days, and it's really hard to lose, and you just expect to be able to do whatever and not die, right? Like your guy can get shot 50 times before he has to respawn.
I do think that a lot of games that have like quick save and quick load, as soon as you introduce quick save, quick load, then you don't have to worry about replayability, right? Like you figure the person's never going to have to play the beginning of the game more than once if they don't want to. And so it can cause game designers, I think, to be a little lazy. Whereas, if you make Mario, you better make World 1-1 pretty cool. Otherwise, that's going to be 90% of what people play. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I'll check that out. I love roguelikes. So that sounds awesome.
All right. And now we're about to have an interview. And
That's right. We're going to interview Dave, who works for Naughty Dog. And we're going to
interview Florent, who works for Ubisoft.
That's right. And they are actual game developers. So we talked about game development, game programming in the past, but we got an opportunity to interview people who are actually there doing it, and that was definitely very exciting for us. And I think we'll all find it pretty awesome.
All right, so we'll be back in just a second.
Hey everyone, we have a very special show today. We're actually talking about industry game programming, and we have two industry game programming experts. We have Dave Smith, who's a tools programmer at Naughty Dog, and we have Florent. How do you pronounce your last name?
Devilcheval.
Devilcheval?
Yep.
Cool. Florent Devilcheval is a tools programmer at Ubisoft, and I'm sure you guys know about Naughty Dog and Ubisoft. They're also going to kind of explain those companies if you don't, which is fine. And so we're going to kind of talk about what it's like to work at a real game studio. I'm sure a lot of you out there are very interested. So just to get started, Florent and Dave, tell us a little bit about sort of your history, how you kind of got involved in games programming and things like that.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I've always wanted to do video games, actually. So once I graduated from the university, I simply started to look for a job in the video game industry. I didn't find a job at first, so I went to work as a software developer. I did that for a year, and then after that, Ubisoft was looking for a tools programmer. I applied, and I got hired. So I worked on Assassin's Creed, and now I'm working on The Division.
And how long have you been there?
3 years.
Cool. And so what about Dave?
Hi, this is Dave. So I've worked at Naughty Dog about 6 years, and before that, I worked at a few startups in San Francisco, and then I was an independent consultant for a while. I like Flo. When I got out of school, I really wanted to make games, but at the time it was 1999, and I was seduced by the hope of becoming rich in San Francisco at a software startup. And if you know anything about the software market around that time, I got there just in time to see it all crash. So I never got rich.
Did you go to any of these? I heard crazy stories about, like pets.com bought this entire hotel and anyone can just stay here, and just kind of crazy stories about the .com boom. Did you experience any of that?
There's one story I have that is crazy to me. I worked for a company that was incubated by a startup incubator, which is basically just a big company with a bunch of investment funds that has been given the edict to go spawn smaller companies that hopefully will grow into the next pets.com, I guess. And so I think they had endowment of like $1 billion, of which the company I work for, had a seed of some tiny percentage. But of that $1 billion, they spent something like $200 or $500 million of it buying a big old building in downtown San Francisco, which seems just like the most flagrant, wasteful way to spend your money if you're trying to work as a startup incubator. But other than that, I don't really know a lot of, truly crazy startup stories.
All right, cool. Fair enough.
Yeah. So after I bounced around a few startups, I decided to become an independent consultant. I did that for a few years, but always still wanted to make games. So I just started applying to different studios and studying the things that I thought I needed to learn to do that, and eventually wound up here at Naughty Dog.
Cool. Very awesome. What are sort of the different roles? I mean, imagine, a game requires a lot of different people to kind of come together. Obviously people know about these really old games like Pitfall and things like that were made by one person, but that's sort of more of like a relic, right? And nowadays, there's a lot of people involved in making a game. And so what are sort of these different people that you have to work with? And so what are the requirements or the expertise that each of them bring to the table?
Yeah, you definitely can't make a game alone anymore. Well, you can, but if you want to make AAA games, it's kind of hard to do it on your own. Because, obviously you need artists. So people who will basically make all the 3D assets or 2D assets that you need. So the meshes, the textures. You might also need animators. So people who will make animations for your characters and for your AI agents. The designers also are really, really important. They are basically building the rules of your game. And also they are doing the level design. Basically, that's what a good level design is, what makes a game fun compared to a game that won't be fun. You have also programmers, of course. You have a lot of different type of programming in a AAA studio. So of course you've got tools, but you have a lot. Like you can have graphics engineers, you can have gameplay engineers, network, UI, QA. So yeah, you can do a lot of things in programming. One thing also that is really important is all the testers and the QA team. Basically, they are here to make sure that the level of quality for the game is reached. Like the game is really what it needs to be. Yeah. I don't know, Dave. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good list. I think there are some roles that people tend to overlook when they're thinking about game production, just because they're not part of the core production process. So I think the people you mentioned are the kind of the army that goes into deployment and builds most of the game. But then there's also a lot of people in pre-production, like the writers and the concept artists and designers who do the early work to figure out what the game is going to be about and what it's going to look like, and the story structure for the game if you have a narrative game. And then on the flip side, at the end of the cycle, there's a lot of people in QA, like you mentioned, to make sure everything's going to work, but also who do localization to translate the game to 25 different languages, and who do release management and marketing. And then also there's usually a lot of producers who manage the time of the individuals involved with production. Although I mentioned that knowing that Naughty Dog, unlike most studios, has very few producers. We have a couple producers from Sony, and that's all. Whereas I think most studios have the producers are much more involved in production.
Yeah, I think one thing interesting with video games is that whatever you're into, you can practically apply it to video games. Like if you are into architecture, well, you can build levels using your architecture skills. If you are into writing stories, well, you can basically write stories for video games. So whatever you like to do, I'm pretty sure there is a field where you can fit in.
What's the mobility like between different roles? So most people listening to the podcast are, kind of coders at some level. If you're working on, say, tools programming, how likely it is over the course of your career that you'd also maybe do like graphics engine work or other kinds of coding roles than just tools programming, or is it people kind of have their thing and that's what they tend to stay with?
Well, I would say it depends on the company you're working on. Like maybe some companies, if you're a tools programmer, you're gonna stay a tools programmer. At Ubisoft, actually, you can change if you're a tools programmer and you want to change to gameplay. And of course, if there is an opening for that role, you can do that. But I think it also depends on the what you want to do. Because basically, of course, if you've been doing, I don't know, graphics programming for 10 years and then you're applying to another company to make network programming, they might wonder why you're doing that. Or, they might say, okay, but you're so good with graphics, we wanna keep you into graphics. So yeah, you can definitely change your role, change your domain, but it's basically up to you.
Yeah,
Cool. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say my experience is similar in that it's definitely up to you, and it depends a lot on the studio and the people you're working with. But just like in most disciplines, people are always desperate for capable individuals. So if you want to transition to a different role, the best way to do that is just to be excellent at the role you're looking to move into. But at the same time, game companies are trying really hard to push a product out the door. So that puts a lot of obstacles in the way of making that transition from one role to another, just because once you become an expert in a specific domain, the company will definitely need you to produce in that domain because your job exists because they have a need in that role. So that makes it difficult to extract yourself from stuff that you're already an expert at doing.
And to be fair, that's like all companies. For people who haven't worked a long time, that often is the case.
This is like a epic paradox that has probably been around since the beginning of time, or at least the beginning of modern civilization. But yeah, it's just you want to specialize, and by doing something you get better at that thing. But at the same time, through being sort of eclectic, like if you look at amazing discoveries and inventions, they're almost always through someone taking one idea and applying it to a different field. And in general, a lot of people don't like repetition. And so it's this paradoxical thing where, you get this positive reinforcement loop from doing the thing you're good at over and over again, but then you also kind of need to keep changing it up. And so you hear a lot of these debates in any industry about open versus closed allocation and things like that. And I think it's pretty cool. It sounds like the games industry is one of those places where you can kind of move around a little bit and still kind of get to experience a lot of different areas in the same company.
Well, I think that's what it's cool when you're doing tools, actually, because you're seeing so many different things that there is no routine. It's never boring. So you might not want to change of job, actually.
Yeah, it makes sense. Cool. So, a lot of people, maybe are in high school or in university or have been through a computer science degree. And so at one point, everyone kind of thought, oh, I'm going to make a cool game. Or maybe everyone just made tic-tac-toe at one point. At least almost everyone has kind of done that at one point, whether it's for a course or for fun or something like that. And so people have made Pac-Man clones and things like that in sort of their basement or garage or what have you. And so someone who sort of has had that experience of just kind of making a game for fun, what's the difference between that and actually kind of making a professional game that turns into something that you see on the shelves?
Well, the main thing will be that if you are making an indie game, you will do a lot of different things. You will have to work on 3D assets, on sounds, on menus, on programming, on the design. You will have to work on everything. But when you are making a AAA game, you will work on your specific system. You might only work on this little part of the game. When you're doing an indie game, you will work basically on almost everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I mean, it's a lot more highly specialized. I used to, before I became a professional, I made games for myself all the time, and you did get to work on every aspect of the game. Whereas once you're professionally employed, you tend to find a specific niche where you can be productive, and you learn that niche very well. And a lot of the other things don't necessarily come on your table that often. But on the other hand, I'm trying to think. I had something else to say about that, but I can't remember what it was. And I remember you guys talking about this. I'm touching back on something that you mentioned a second ago, which is that I think a lot of programmers did come from a background where they made games or worked on games. And I know you talked about that on one of your shows recently. And I was trying to think how I got started. And actually, my very first program was a game that I wrote in longhand on like a yellow spiral notebook. It was a choose your own adventure game I wrote in BASIC and
Nice.
then transcribed onto a computer. And obviously, that was a terrible way to develop a program. It didn't work at all. But yeah, like from the very beginning, it was always games that was driving me to become a programmer. And I really do wonder, like, what percentage of programmers got into this field because they wanted to make games?
Yeah, I think it's pretty huge. Just from I asked this to a lot of people, and I would say I don't know if it's the majority, but it might be, yeah, more the majority of people out there got into it from wanting to make games. My experience with making games, I always ended up, I mean, one of the things is when you make a game by yourself, you really have no mentor, no one with experience telling you what's going on. So you have to kind of learn everything the hard way. I had these grandiose visions of, it's as complex as civilization, but has this amazing narrative that's generated automatically through an artificial intelligence. And like you end up with, an armature walking. Like after 2 years, you have like a stick figure in 3D that can walk.
Yeah,
And,
I think that's interesting because it's actually a problem of scope. When you're working on an indie game, you might not be able to have the same scope as a big production. So you need to be way more pragmatic. You need to go straight to the point.
Yeah, I think
that's right.
it seems like most people, when they want to make a game, the first thing they want to make is, I want to make a grand open world procedurally generated MMO, which is like the largest possible scope of a professional game.
Yeah.
But it kind of underscores one of the other big differences between making games by yourself or at an indie studio versus a AAA studio, which is just the quality requirements at a AAA studio are stratospheric relative to what you're doing by yourself. Just the level of polish that we as a studio put onto every aspect of production is way, way higher than any individual could hope to accomplish. We'll just obsess over things like when the game transitions from a cinematic segment to an in-game segment, the IK on the elbows will pop a little bit. So you'll see a little shift in the character's elbows and knees when we shift from one camera to another. And we'll spend, weeks trying to solve that kind of problem. But if you're making a game by yourself, it would be a foolish allocation of time to spend that much effort fixing that kind of problem.
Yeah, I think that's also because as a player, we all expect AAA games to actually have this kind of little details fixed. But when you're playing an indie game, well, you might be okay with a few things wrong here and there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a lot of indie games are actually one of two things. Either they're sort of variations on other games with like a clever, funny theme, or actually they're interesting stories where they could have survived as like a novel, which, many novels are written by one person, maybe with an editor or two editors. And so it's a very compelling story, and they've kind of put a game on top of it. And so that those are the two things I think one person, one or two people can do well. But yeah, I mean, as soon as you start saying words like MMO, you're in trouble.
But I think that's also
definitely.
one of the recent developments with things like Unity, which we had an episode about recently, is it's more than just a game engine that they're providing hobbyists, but they're trying to provide a tool chain as well, right? Stuff for managing assets and levels and that, which before, if you were trying to do that on your own, would just be crazy. But now if you're leveraging the work of other people in that infrastructure, even as an individual or a few people, you can try to do something more ambitious.
Yeah, that leads right into our next question, which is, obviously a lot of people know about Unity. I think 2 or 3 shows ago we covered Unity. And so the question is, why do studios still roll their own game engines? I mean, it seems like everyone should just be using Unity.
Oh, well, like that quickly, I would think about 2 different things. The first is that it all depends on the game you're making, how specific the needs you've got. I think one good example is Grand Theft Auto 5. I mean, if you were making Grand Theft Auto 5 with Unity, you would end up with a lot of problems, not just about the streaming, but also about the editor part. You will end up basically rewriting everything. So all the gain that you will have by taking this existing engine, well, you will lose it because you will have to change everything. The other thing is, since you are using this engine developed by someone else, let's say you need these features like right now, and since you are buying this engine, you might not have the engine team to make it yourself. So you depend on that other company that is making this engine. So you will have to wait for them to implement it for you, and that's something you might not want because, well, you can't wait 6 months or 1 year in a production for a certain feature to be implemented. Also, you are kind of dependent on the license fees. Well, right now, Unity is free or almost free. Unreal Engine is also real cheap. But when you are a AAA studio, those license fees can go up really quickly.
Yeah, I think I have that. I ask myself the same question all the time. Why are we still able to compete given the just amazing quality of the engines you can buy off the shelf like Unity or Unreal, or even the amazing quality that other larger multi-studio organizations like Ubisoft or other studios have access to? And, it makes me sweat because like the artists will come to me and they'll show me some YouTube video of this really slick tool that's built into Unreal 4 that makes it, incredibly easy to build shaders or drop assets into the game. And I know that the process we have internally for doing the same things is really hacked together and duct taped together. And it's kind of embarrassing to point at that and say, yeah, we're going to make games to compete with Unreal, but our tool set in a lot of ways doesn't have anywhere near that level of finish. So I think about that question a lot. And I think there's a couple answers I've come up with. I don't know if they're true, but the first one would be that when you take a tool like Unreal off the shelf, then you have the same starting point as every other studio that has not Unreal or Unity. And 95% of all games fail. So you have to think hard about what is it that makes my game unique and what gives us our competitive advantage in this really competitive marketplace. And if you're using an off-the-shelf engine, it can be difficult to develop a competitive advantage because you're always working with the same tools that everybody else has. So even though some aspects of our pipeline are duct taped together, when we decide that something is really important for our game, like if we want really smooth, buttery movement mechanics, or if we want really great character faces and emotion in our characters, we can devote a lot of engineering resources to that problem that people who are stuck with the tools that come with Unity or Unreal just can't devote because they can't crack open the covers and make those changes themselves. Or like Flo was talking about, they have to rely on a third party to provide those things for them. So even though 90% of the stuff you get out of one of those off-the-shelf tools is really slick and works really well, and you have to make do with the last 10%, if you roll your own engine, you get to decide exactly what you want for 100% of the engine. And it turns out that last 10% of things is really, really important in delivering a game that can stand out from the marketplace and feel unique and be successful.
Yeah, one thing that's kind of interesting about games, and I'm sure there are other fields like this, I mean, I guess movies or things like that, but is, if you look at, say, Honda, for example, I mean, Honda has to do sort of variations to the car every year, but at the end of the day, like the car is largely the same from one year to the next. And So they just sort of, they have a product cycle, but at the end of the day, they know that they have brand loyalty and things like that, and they just know that a certain number of people are going to buy Hondas. And there might even be a segment of people who don't want the next Honda to look different than the first one. They just want to keep buying their Honda, right? But a game is different. I mean, if you went so far as to literally release the same game a year later, no one would buy it. Like, that doesn't even make sense, right?
Maybe.
What? No, I mean, like, literally, like, if you were to have literally the same game, I mean, I'm taking it to the extreme, right? And you were to discount the first game and leave the new game at the same price, there's no reason, right?
Well,
So
the argument
the point is,
against that is like the sports games, right?
Yeah.
So some sports games are really similar year to year, like almost no changes, but the lineups are different. So you want to play the most recent. If you really follow soccer, right, you want the FIFA lineups that are this year's lineups.
I would argue that the content is the lineup, and changing that is significant. I would argue that even though it's the code isn't changing, that the game itself changes dramatically just because of the But anyways, you're right that that's sort of a corner case. But I feel like one thing that's interesting about games is that you have to sort of stay novel, and you have to constantly be doing different things to entertain. I think that is really fascinating. And I would imagine that probably goes into needing to roll your own game engine so that you can sort of diversify yourself.
Yeah. I think the one thing is that when you're using Unreal Engine or Unity, you cannot make assumption. So basically, those systems have to work for every different kind of games. But when you're making an open world game, you might not have like a 2D physics system really strong because you won't use it that much. But that's the kind of assumption that you cannot have when you're making Unity or Unreal. Also, the fact that you have your own engine lets you try a different thing, and maybe in an easier way, because of course you know your engine upside down. You made it yourself, so it might be easier to break everything in it, change stuff in it, and to try new gameplays.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
Were you going to say something, Dave?
Oh, go ahead, Dave.
I'm not sure. I can't remember what I was going to say, but I do think, like, as a counterpoint to that, I think it's also worth saying that I think the tools that are there, like Unity and Unreal, are amazing tools. And if you're a smaller scale developer, or even if you are a big developer whose competitive advantage doesn't come from the kind of things that derive from building your own engine, then those tools are amazing, and you should embrace them and run with it. I can think of several studios that are using those tools and making incredible games, and so I wouldn't want to dissuade anybody who's listening to this podcast from taking an off-the-shelf product and just running with it, because those things they're really great. I'm so excited that they're on the market now.
Well, and I think that's the thing as engineers, programmers, that we tend to do sometimes is say, like, oh, you can't write a serious application game in thing X. And it's like, well, maybe, but, it just depends on what you're trying to do. And we talk about this a lot, like with web frameworks is another example. People say, oh, I don't know how to write a web app that scales to 10 million simultaneous users. It's like, well, but that's not your initial problem. Your initial problem is to make it interesting for one user. And so what you do to get service for one user or 100 users or 1,000 users, you have more flexibility in what tool to use. And using a really sophisticated tool or rolling your own, server, binaries and applications would actually just get you nowhere really fast, because you would spend all your time doing that and you would never make your web app.
So you're saying that if Unity was around, I would have been able to complete my Civilization MMO procedural content game? I was just born too early.
I think anyone who tried Unity and Unreal for like 10 minutes quickly understands that those are really, really powerful tools. And I think actually working at Epic Games or Unity on those editors and engines, even as a tools programmer, it's almost a different kind of job than working on your own level editor and engine in a AAA game studios, because the level of details is not the same. I mean, we don't need this kind of generic systems, and this is also why Unreal and Unity are really powerful. It's because they can achieve this kind of level of details and generic system. Yeah, they are really impressive tools.
Cool. So, so I would imagine like several people in the audience, several people out there are students, as we talked about, but there are also a lot of people who work in just a variety of industries. We've seen sort of everything from petroleum engineers, someone who makes lightsabers for a living, all sorts of things. And so a lot of people don't know what it's like to sort of be a full-time, programmer, and specifically like in the game studio, day to day, what it's like, kind of what the atmosphere is like. So can you kind of like take us through sort of an average day in your role and what that kind of feels like?
Well, as a tools programmer, the days are never the same, actually. As I said earlier, there is like no routine. So that's something I really like about it. It's never boring, basically. You know what you have like long-term tasks, so that you do every day. Most of the times they come from the other teams, like artists, animators, designers. They need you to make some specific tools so they can work in a more efficient way. But very often what happens is that someone comes to you with this really blocking bugs, so they need you to fix it. So that's the no routine part of the job. So yeah, basically one morning you can come up and work on shaders, and then the next day you will work on the sequence editor, and then the next day you will work on something else. That's one of the really great part of the job.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think unlike a lot of other programming roles in a game studio, you have a really large diversity of tasks as a game programmer, so there isn't a prototypical day. But I guess, I mean, the activities do break down along certain lines. You spend a lot of time, like Bo said, doing support. An artist will call you and say, Maya is crashing on me, or my shaders won't compile, and so you spend some time trying to figure out why that's happening, which is probably very similar to things that happen in any kind of programming discipline, not just game programming. And you spend a lot of time near the end of the production fighting fires. Like something will go wrong and a bunch of assets will get corrupted. And it's a little bit different than your typical support call in that it tends to be a crisis, and just invest a lot of energy trying to recreate work or steer around a problem that you didn't anticipate until the last minute. I guess that is a big thing that's different from other programming disciplines when you're working in the game studio, and that's that it's very cyclical. The beginning of a project, right after you ship the game, feels a lot different from the end of a project 3 months before you're ready to ship a game. I mean, at the end, you're working really long hours, and everybody's kind of getting together to try and push the thing over the finish line, whereas at the beginning of the cycle, there's a lot more pontificating about the future and trying to decide about the architectural directions of your software and that kind of thing. Yeah, I think working for a game studio is a lot like working for a software startup, which is what I did before I was a game programmer. So it tends to be very loose as opposed to the kind of bureaucratic or structured image that I have of other kinds of programming jobs.
So not a lot of meetings is what you're saying.
Yeah, I've almost no meetings. I have probably maybe 5 meetings a year.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Maybe that's low.
I thought you were going to say a day.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say a day too. Oh man, we have too many meetings.
Yeah, I consider for my job to not have many meetings relative to my previous job, but I have at least 1 or 2 a day.
Yeah, Patrick. Yeah, definitely.
it depends on what you call a meeting too, because I have a ton of just conversations. Like
No, I mean
people will
meeting.
just naturally aggregate and talk about problems in the kitchen or by their desks, but very few meetings in Outlook in a conference room where you all sit around and write in your notebooks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going through. Yeah, I have on average 3 meetings a day. Oh man. Cool. What about like I would imagine, a lot of people who work at a game studio are into games, and so there I would imagine you guys have a pretty cool game room. We just got a ping pong table in our game room, and that was a big deal. But I would imagine, over there you guys have a pretty cool setup with like couches and things like that to relax every now and then.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you have access to all the video games you can imagine. So you can even take them home if you want. So that's pretty cool.
But do you?
But
Do
yeah,
you want to play video games at the end of the day?
really, I think since I'm working in the video game industry, I've never. Yeah, no, I don't play so much anymore.
Oh, it's
'Cause
like seeing Mickey Mouse with his head off, right? As soon
Yeah,
as you work
kinda.
at Disney and you see the
Yeah.
Mickey Mouse, with the
The
head
thing is,
removed, it kind
the
of.
thing is, the thing is, before being in the video game industry, I used to play to almost all the game I could get my hands on, and right now I'm kind of like more choosing the games I want to play. It's also maybe because of a lack of time, so I need to be more selective. But yeah, you have also a kitchen where you can spend some times. Uh, we have free candies. We have a lot of cool stuff. Table soccer. Uh,
Cool. So we talked about seeing Mickey with his head off, and that kind of leads to the next question, which is you've seen different, the games at different stages. You've seen the game on day one, and you've seen the game on day T-1, and so sort of what's that like? Playing the game that's half finished. I mean, I found a picture in my head as you sort of drop stick figures because you don't have any artwork, and then the game is just like uber comical, kind of like goofy tragic comedy. You have like stick figures falling over and things like that. But sort of what is that like? Is that kind of fun or torture, or is it, what are the sort of experiences like playing sort of the game as it gets more and more polished?
yeah, it's definitely fun. The thing is, sometimes you need like a huge imagination to just see what the game will be at the end. Especially like I remember when for sequences of the games, like when you don't have animations or you don't have the final textures, and instead of seeing like these nice moves and animations, all you see is just your character in T-pose moving around, just being translated, and with placeholders everywhere for sounds, for the backgrounds, for everything. You definitely sometimes a big imagination, but it's funny. But the thing is, as a tools programmer, I often play the game in debug, so it means I have everything like the settings at the lowest possible because I need to debug the game. So I'm often the last one to see like the final quality of the game, like with the highest graphics and stuff.
Yeah, I love behind the scenes stuff. I love watching DVD commentary and that kind of thing where you can see how something's put together. So I really love that part at the beginning of a project where it's not exactly stick figures. It's like the opposite of stick figures because Naughty Dog's an old studio, so we have built up 30 years worth of assets, and some of them look incredible. When you're starting a new game, you throw away maybe 75% of what you had, but you still have to some extent, beautiful character models, and some motion loops are really highly polished animation. So you've got the opposite of a stick figure in that there's Nathan Drake, and he's running around the world, and he has perfect animation, and he himself is rendered pretty well, but everything around him is just gray boxes and, stubbed in stuff. And so you really do have to use your imagination. And in a lot of ways, it's a lot of fun, but it's also just terrifying because you're just seeing the enormous amount of work that's sitting in front of you. And I think here especially, I'm always shocked at how late things come together. I mean, even just weeks or, a couple months before a product ships, I see things that to me are just really scary. Like, I'm not sure how we're going to pull it off. And it's a real testament to this studio that people always exceed my expectations, even though my expectations at this point are really high of the people I'm working with. But they always just come through and do just amazing things in what seems like an impossibly short amount of time.
So is it more that you'll have like a single level built up to an almost finished state before adding all the other levels? Or you have all the levels kind of start to play together, but in a really rudimentary state, and then they kind of all improve in lockstep, but you're playing the game end to end with kind of missing parts?
Well, I guess it depends on the kind of game you're making. From my experience, everything goes up in parallel. Like every mission is built in parallel, and the features. So when you at the start of the production, of course, you don't have much. But when you do something like a new feature, it's supposed to work on every other level at the same time. So yeah, the content is supposed to be more horizontal, working throughout the game rather than doing specific to a level.
Right.
Yeah, that's actually that's interesting. That's pretty different from the way we end up doing things. I mean, at the beginning of the process, we end up with a large variety of different kinds of levels. The designers will have cooked up a few levels to test out, or I wouldn't even really call them levels, but just environments to test out new game mechanics that they want to try, or just obstacles or puzzles that they think would be interesting. And at the same time, in pre-production, they've developed a narrative arc for the story, and some parts of that arc they may be confident will go into the game, and other parts they may think are going to require some tweaking. So the parts that have more confidence end up going to production earlier. So you'll see that stuff get put together early in the process. But there's big chunks of the game that we may not even start working on until pretty late in the process. We'll tend to do a vertical slice at some point where we try and come up with a section of the game that demonstrates all the gameplay mechanics that we want, all the rendering features that we think we'll need, and we'll test out all the elements of the production pipeline that we expect to have at the end. And then we'll build that start to finish to a high level of polish just to validate that we're going down a path that we can actually finish. And then from there, if things are successful, we'll make adjustments and start to bring other parts of the game to a greater level of polish. And then we just test like crazy. Every 6 weeks near the end of the project, we'll have focus testing where people will come in and play the game, and based on their feedback, we'll make changes and try and make it more fun and cut out stuff that's not working.
Yeah,
one thing. Go ahead, Laurent.
Sorry. Yeah, one thing is that I don't know at Naughty Dog, but at Ubisoft we use a lot of test maps. I think you said that, Dave. That's something most of the people don't know. Is that when you are, for example, implementing a new feature, you won't test it directly into the final game. You will actually make like a test map that is dedicated to that, and someone is like iterating on these new features. This will be the map where you will test your features. And yeah, we're trying to do things in a modular way, and then we put that in the final game.
So I heard stories. Actually, I believe the stories came out of Naughty Dog Studios, but there's stories about like the original Crash Bandicoot and how they had this crazy sort of Monte Carlo heuristic to pack things.
Yeah, we were talking about that last episode.
Yeah, we talked about this last episode. And so you hear so much about this. There was an old game where you had to shoot. It was a Star Wars game for the Atari 50 or Atari 2600, where you just shot these horizontal lasers at this Death Star looking thing. And there was a band in the middle of the screen where you were invulnerable, but you also couldn't shoot. And it didn't really make sense. And then the game developer said, yeah, I couldn't fix this bug, and so I just made it part of the game. And so you just hear these stories of just this, like, it sounds very epic of just like amazing feats of engineering at very desperate moments. And I just wonder, I haven't really kept up to date. And so just with Moore's Law, computers getting stronger, more memory, things like that, do you still have these sort of crazy moments where at the end you have to do something heroic to make the game work, or is that kind of a relic?
Yes and no. I think maybe not in tools actually. Maybe if you ask to gameplay programmers, they might have this kind of story. But since I'm making tools, the tools I'm making are not shipped with the game. But yeah, since the deadline is often yesterday, you might, especially at the end of the game when you are crunching, you might end up forgetting all your nice rules about how to write nice code and start to
Right.
be efficient. Well, efficient, if you can call this efficient, but pushing stuff in the game. Yeah, I don't have specific stories about it though.
Yeah, it definitely happens. I'm trying to think of good examples of that or good stories. Most of the examples I can think of aren't that sexy or just don't make great stories. Like I know that during near the end of one of our last projects, we got within a couple weeks of having to print discs and send them off to manufacturing to go into Best Buy, and we still hadn't received something like 95% of the translations for one of the languages, which would mean if we didn't get those into the game, that would mean delaying production and delaying the ship of the game, and it would basically cost just tens of millions of dollars probably for us to recover from that mistake. So when you face the prospect of trying to chew through 100,000 audio files all within the last week of production and try and make sure that they all live up to our standards for quality, that can be pretty terrifying, but not necessarily that exciting. There's other bugs where I know our save games were getting corrupted after we shipped The Last of Us, so there was a pretty heroic effort to try and solve that as quickly as possible because it meant people were playing the game and then losing all of their progress after the first day. Yeah, stuff definitely happens, but I'm failing to come up with great examples to talk about.
All right, cool. Yeah, it sounds. I mean, anything that's on sort of a product cycle. I believe Patrick, your current task is on a product cycle. Is that correct or no?
Somewhat, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, me as well. I'm rather new to it, but my current task has me on a product cycle, and it is pretty stressful and but it's also pretty awesome when you have such a tight deadline to sort of see what sort of innovative thing you can do to get the 80%, the mythical 80% solution.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stories end up being things for me is like there's some bug you can't find, and you end up just trying to detect the thing that causes the bug and just like end around it. Like when you notice this happening, just reset this other thing, and then you just document it that like just do this. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing some issue in a video game. Might have been like Zelda Ocarina of Time, where some level crashed, and in the end they just deleted that level and shipped it. It's just like funny thing. But cool. So it, there's obviously there's a lot of people who are really into games, love what you guys are doing, and want to become a game programmer. Many of people that we talk to are in university or maybe going to university again or in high school or things like that. Definitely interested in learning. Those are people who kind of gravitate to the show and things like that. So for these kind of people, what sort of subjects should they study to become a good game programmer, tools programmer, etc.?
Well, definitely computer science, of course, but mathematics like linear algebra, everything that is related to 3D. Even if you won't do that every day, like even if you're not a graphics engineer, when you will apply for a job in the video game industry, you can be sure that you will be asked question about 3D. So you need to know your linear algebra. Also, a bit about low-level architecture, like the machines, how they work, how the CPU work, and in relation with the memory. Once again, even if it's not your everyday job, they're gonna ask you to, and it's really useful sometimes when you need to optimize stuff. You also need a good demo or a good project, even if it's not related to video games. Even if it's a tool, if it's a procedural, if it's something generating stuff procedurally, whatever it is, have a good portfolio and good tools.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Those are all, especially would want to underscore the need for strong math skills. I think that's something that differentiates game programming from other disciplines. There's a more math required, especially linear algebra, than you would encounter in traditional application programming. So if you're looking for a way to study for game programming as opposed to other fields, that would be something to spend a lot of time on. I'd also point out that at a high level, we as a studio, and I'm sure every other studio, are just desperate for qualified people. So if you want to get into the industry, just do your best to become qualified, and the studios will definitely want to use your skills. Some other things that I can think of that maybe wouldn't have been obvious to me on my road here, like facing forward, but looking back, but there's a lot of projects that I worked on that I found especially educational. So I would just list a couple of those, like making your own OS, even if it's just a tiny one that does barely anything, is really valuable for teaching you the relationship between the computer hardware and the software that's running on it. Building a compiler is equally incredibly educational for teaching you what's going on behind the covers when you write your software. Writing a ray tracer is a really valuable thing to learn that 3D math and to learn graphics. And it's surprisingly not that difficult. Like once you get into it, it looks incredibly impenetrable when you start out, but once you're done, you will have learned a ton of stuff that's incredibly valuable. And then, of course, just make games. Like do whatever you can do that keeps you excited about making games, and those projects will lead you down a path that should be successful.
That's funny that you talk about making a retracer for learning linear algebra, because that's exactly what I did actually when I was a student. I wanted to be fluent with matrices and stuff like that. So I thought, what kind of project would allow me to learn this? And I thought about a retracer. So that's exactly what I did. Yeah, it's true. It's really important to have educational project.
And it'll also help you if you want to do machine learning.
What's that?
So that's completely opposite. Learning about linear algebra and matrices, because that's the other thing, it crops up all the time. Because I don't program games, but only time I encounter math is when someone's done some machine learning something. And then it's like, oh, there's the math. I found it. It's hiding in one place in the project.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I would have thought that you would definitely want to do something practical, in the sense that if you have to choose between linear algebra and networking, Ethernet networking, I would imagine that the choice would be Ethernet networking, but I'm actually proven wrong. It sounds like having sort of a good theoretical computer science background is still really important for game development.
Yeah, definitely, but it's not all theoretical. When I mean, for example, know your linear algebra. When you're making a retracer, it's not just a good algorithm. You're not sending to people a CPP file. It's actually a software that can generate pictures, and this is what you're gonna send to people to apply for a job with all those nice pictures that you've made and all the techniques you were able to develop. But yeah, you're right in being pragmatic. Like if you're making a game demo, maybe try to reduce the scope rather than trying, as we said earlier, to do these open world MMO games that you will never finish anyway. So yeah, you definitely need to be practical in some ways.
Yeah,
but I mean, I do think you're right that you might be using linear algebra more during the interview process than during your job. If you're looking for a job like a network engineer, and consistent with what I was saying before about just becoming qualified at what you want to do. If you really want to be a network engineer at a game studio, then yeah, I would just recommend learn Ethernet in and out. Learn everything you can about networking and about how networking in games is applied. And I think that would also be a perfect way to find your way into the industry.
And it's other industries too that have the kind of thing where you have to do stuff for the interview only sometimes. Like, when I did interview for my current company, I had to implement, a heap sort. And it's like, since I've worked at the company, I've never implemented my own heap sort. There's libraries that do that for me. But to prove I had the knowledge, right, like that was what I needed to do to pass the interview.
Yeah, that's right. And sort of along those lines, this seems kind of obvious, but it's actually it was surprising to me, and I had to learn it the hard way. So I will try to spare as many people as possible. But know about games. I mean, I applied for a job a long time ago, and it wasn't a game programming job, but the interview was going well. I felt like I could answer the technical questions and things like that. And at some point, someone was asking me questions kind of about the product of the company. And the only thing I knew about the company was that I had, created an account, because you had to create an account to apply for a job. And it ended up just kind of, that part went very badly, as it should have, because I, didn't sort of do any research beforehand on the company itself. I kind of just thought, oh, they want someone to write code. I can write code. But the reality is they want someone who sort of belongs, who they feel like they can trust, and who feels like is committed to sort of that company's vision. If they just, the problem with just getting someone who can code is that it's sort of like contract work, right? I mean, they might as well outsource it. But if they're hiring you to join their company, they want you to sort of join their family, right? And so in this case, that means understanding the games and understanding the games that company makes, and sort of what their audience is and how they work, things like that.
Yeah, you definitely need passion anyway. You often heard those crazy stories about someone who was hired just because, I don't know, he knocked on the door, there was light, he came in, and then he got hired. But that was like maybe 10, 20 years ago. Now it's so complicated to make a game that you basically all the studios in the world are looking for really strong artists and really strong programmers. So they can be quite selective. So yeah, you need skills, of course, but knowing the games is, of course, mandatory.
So what if I have a high score in a game? Will that mean I can get a job?
Actually, maybe to be in a QA.
Okay.
That might help, but for something else, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I used to do some work on emulators. I have done a lot of work on emulators, and there have been a lot of people from sort of the emulator, I guess, scene. I don't know if that sounds too hipster, but there's been like a lot of people from the sort of the emulator scene who have gone to game companies, and game companies tend to really like those people because they know they're into games, and they can do sort of the low level bit of it. And so, we always talk about do open source if you want to get started on a project. And although games, we just talked about how hard it is to make a game by yourself, there's tons of open source projects that are games related and that can give you really great experience.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry.
I was just going to say that's definitely true, and it's so much fun too. I mean, those projects it's so much fun to work on your own game. So you definitely have to be passionate, like you were saying. I don't know anybody here who, well, I guess I know a few people. I know very few people who don't love games and play them a lot on their own. Just because if you didn't love it, you probably could make more money for less work in a different field. So why would you bother? But if you do really enjoy it, it's a great place to be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of it is about, I answer a lot of questions on Quora, and so many questions on Quora are of the format, should I do X or should I do Y to get the best job? As if it's like some kind of optimization problem. Like what should I take course CS 101 or CS 102 so I can go work at, hot startup XYZ? And the reality is, like, you should just follow your passion. And if your passion is emulators, then there's a high likelihood that you will do something that involves that kind of level of detail and things like that. And so this is no exception. If you find your passion is games, then you will have a much easier time when you do have that crunch time and you have to work those hours. Like, you will have much easier time reconciling that. And even if you've seen sort of Mickey Mouse with his head off, you'll still sort of have satisfaction at the end of the day looking at the finished game because you've immersed yourself in that culture.
I'm just going to have nightmares when I go to sleep tonight. Zombie headless Mickey Mouse. Thanks.
Zombie. Oh man.
Sorry, I interrupted. Someone was going to say something important. No.
Nope.
Okay.
Cool. So yeah, this is awesome. So we'll definitely, as Dave said, and I'm sure as Florent also believes, Naughty Dog and Ubisoft respectively definitely want to have talented, engineers, artists, designers, writers, things like that. And so we'll grab a link from you guys and put it on the blog. If I'm assuming you guys have some kind of like careers page, jobs page, things like that. And so we'll definitely give out the link so people who are interested can sign up.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. We do. And if you're interested and qualified, go apply. That's exactly how I ended up here.
Yeah, definitely.
You guys
Cool.
have any last comments?
Well, play games, make games. It's cool.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I'll let that be the final word.
All right, cool. Well, thanks a lot for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, and super interesting. And everyone out there, definitely send us your feedback. If you have any questions for Dave or Florent, I can pass them over. You can just ask on Facebook or on Google Plus, and we can make sure they're routed to the right person and all of that. As far as one bit of information about the show itself, kind of a bit of meta information on the show, is we do have a Patreon set up, and so I'll send out the link to that. So somebody just actually introduced us to Patreon. Or Patreon, I suppose. It's this website where you can sort of show your craft, and then people can kind of subscribe to it, and they also have sort of a donation. So if you aren't interested in, say, the book of the show, but you still want to support the show, you can go on this Patreon site and sign up. And we do some people have already done that. I don't know how you found us, but that's cool. I do appreciate that. And that definitely helps keep we have pretty intense hosting costs. And so that does sort of help us out there. So I do appreciate it. And thank you guys for all the comments and for all the support you give.
All right, till next time.
The intro music is AXO by Binar Pilot. Programming Throwdown is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 2.0 license. You're free to share, copy, distribute, transmit the work, to remix, adapt the work, but you must provide attribution to Patrick and I, and share alike in kind.